Did the Egan's and Lumen cause the death of Miss Cobel's mother as well as a lot of people in this town? And is that the same thing that's happening with Miss Huang? Because we know Miss Huang is also trying to get that same Wintertide fellowship that Miss Cobel got when she was a child. And with this episode, we know that Lumen has no problem with exploiting kids as long as it makes them $1.
Excuse me, sir. Do you have a moment to save the children?
I'm sorry, man. I'm running late and I just don't have time to chat.
There's a lot to break down in this episode because we found out who actually created Severance. The fact that we know that, you guys should click the subscribe button before Mr. Drummond comes knocking on your door in order to keep Lumen's secrets safe. With that being said, let's break it all down. I think we should start with Miss Cobel's visit to her hometown of Salt's Neck. And we know that it's called Salt's Neck because not only is the welcome sign there, but back in episode 3, that was the name of the town that Miss Cobel was going to when she initially left Lumen. But the reason I think we should start there is because that gives us the biggest clue as to how Lumen operates, but then it also gives us answers to why and how Miss Huang ended up working for Lumen. Because as we learned from Miss Cobel's childhood colleague Hampton, and I call him a colleague because they both were 8 years old when they were working for Lumen as child laborers, which is why Hampton is a man who hates Lumen just as much as Miss Cobel's mother did. And it's because of the way Lumen operates as a whole. We see that this town was built around a factory, the factory where Kier Egan met the love of his life, Imogen, and they started the whole Egan dynasty, which I think ties directly into how Miss Cobel's mother died, as well as so many other people in this town. Because if you guys remember back in season 1, episode 5, when Irving and Bert were talking about how Kier and Imogen met while they were manufacturing ether over an open vat, it ties directly into what Hampton said to Miss Cobel this episode, how they were 8 years old, they would get high and then go work on a vat for 10 hours. What's interesting and why I say it killed Miss Cobel's mother, it's because the chemicals used in ether manufacturing would kill almost everyone nearby using open vats, which is why almost everyone in the town who stayed was either addicted to the drugs or ended up dying if they worked in the factory. Miss Cobel was lucky because she won the Wintertide fellowship. She got to leave before her condition got worse and she ended up like her mother. But some of the people in the town were not so lucky. And that's probably why the whole town looks the way it does. Which is why I think Miss Cobel's mother and Hampton hate the Egans so much, because they knew people would die and they still let them work in the factories anyway, exploiting the labor. And in this town, the factory could be seen as the main source of employment, which it got to the point where the Egans became so powerful that they were employing child laborers and therefore exploiting the town for everything that is had, which is why Miss Cobel says this town seems older and ricketier than before. We see that the Egans have stripped this entire town of all of its resources, not just in natural resources in the factory, but also its people, which is how Miss Cobel ended up so deep in Lumen, which makes me wonder, now that Miss Huang is here, if we're looking at Lumen as a multinational company, which it is, we saw that in the first episode when Mr. Milchek was showing the refiners the new video, we saw that Lumen is worldwide. And what we know about worldwide multinational corporations is they get a lot of cheap labor from overseas, specifically in Asia, which is where Miss Huang comes in. If we're following what happened with Miss Cobel, Lumen went to a small town USA, exploited them for all their resources, and then when they found cheap labor somewhere else, they moved all the jobs overseas. It kind of mirrors what's happening in real life. We see Miss Huang trying to get the Wintertide fellowship that Miss Cobel had won in her youth. What's interesting about this Wintertide fellowship though, it's called the James Egan Wintertide Fellowship. That's very important. James Egan is Helly's father. And what we learned in this episode about what happened between the two of them, mind-blowing. Miss Cobel invented Severance, but the kick is James Egan got all the credit for it because apparently, from what I'm gathering, Miss Cobel created it when she was going to the Myrtle Egan School for Girls, which to me shows just how deep Lumen's clutches go. They're involved in every aspect of society, from the town to the schools. So therefore, they're able to keep building up their dynasty on the shoulders of everyone else, which makes me wonder just how malevolent Kira Egan was, or is all of it a lie and he's just building a cult of personality? Whatever the case may be, what we do know is that James Egan was the one who presented Miss Cobel with the prize, and because he was her mentor and she was the biggest Egan fanatic, we saw how she prayed to them every night. She gave him the blueprints, the Severance, everything, the overtime contingency, the Glasgow block. Every aspect of Severance was thought up and created by Miss Cobel, making her a genius. But because of her religious fanaticism, she passed that up, and James Egan was able to take her invention and make a killing, causing his family to change industries, which now really makes me wonder, did Lumen switch industries once they learned about Severance? Because they were a manufacturer, which is why they had the factory with the child laborers. Let's not forget, the kids were doing drugs in order to work 10 hours a day on vats of chemicals. So we know Lumen, and more specifically the Egans, aren't above exploiting people. So when they were exploiting them for a manufacturing job, it kind of lines up with the evolution of society in America, moving from a more industrialized society to now one focused on data and refinement, which kind of mirrors what happened in Severance. The Egans had their manufacturing base, and once Miss Cobel created Severance, they moved to data refinement, which is where Mark and the MDR floor comes in. And with all that comes corporations and the board, which is interesting because the board is the one who's in charge of Lumen. And I'm assuming James Egan sits on top of the board as the chairman. Miss Cobel answers to the board, and the board answers to the Egans because they quote unquote created Severance. But what I think really is the mind bend here is the fact that Miss Cobel is at their mercy when she is the one who created the very thing that they're making the profit off of, which is Severance. So it makes me wonder about the James Egan Wintertide Fellowship. Helly's father knows that he got the idea from Miss Cobel, yet he doesn't even speak to her or give her any acknowledgement. So it makes me wonder, was this program a way for Lumen to identify and recruit future players? The Wintertide Fellowship being a way for them to sort of create a brain drain where they find the most promising individuals, they bring them in, and they steal their ideas? Is that the way that the Egan dynasty and Lumen has been growing all these years? From Kira Egan all the way down to James, and now they're looking at Helly, who hasn't innovated anything yet, which could be why her father treats her the way she does. But that's somewhat hypocritical, I think, because if you stole your idea from Miss Cobel and now you're trying to find a way for Helly to revolutionize it, it's like, bro, why don't you revolutionize it? Because it's not even your idea in the first place, unless Cold Harbor is Helly's idea, which I don't think it is. I think that might be more of the brainchild of Mr. Drummond, who I think knows Miss Cobel created Severance as well, because I feel like Mr. Drummond knows everything that's going on. It kind of makes you wonder, was Drummond also part of this recruitment program, Mr. Milchek? All the people who are super loyal to Lumen that don't work on the severed floor and don't go through Severance, are they recruited from childhood and bred and manipulated to becoming who they are? Which could be why they're also devoted to Kier. They're all a part of this quote unquote religion that is Lumen, this religion that is the Egans. That's the biggest question this episode left me with. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments section below. Guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, peace.